Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world and experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy. Here is where you free your soma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Free Your Soma, Stories of Somatic Awakening and How to Live from the Inside Out. Today, I have Danika Rose with me, and she is a lifelong psychic medium and a light language channel. Some of you may or may not know what that means. I'm excited to talk about what that might mean. She has over 16 years experience in business management, marketing strategy to back up her unique blend of strategy and soul. We're going to talk about some very interesting things today, specifically the ways in which Danikah's birth experiences have shaped her awakening and amplified her psychic abilities. So this is going to be very interesting because I don't think very many people even realize that birth experiences, right? We might hear about birth trauma, right? And kind of give it a label as like, oh, this was a negative thing that happened, that shifted my nervous system in some way. But what I feel like you're pointing to already is that there were actual blessings in your birth experiences that are still, living out in your body to this day.
There really were so many. And thank you for having me, by the way, because I feel like it's so much fun being on really unique podcasts, ones that have like an edge, and it's not something that a lot of people understand. Somatics, they can get a bit confused and not, as you said previously, they don't always realize that that's actually what they're doing, just living day to day. And a lived experience of mine was through my birth experience. And having had 4 of them, I've got quite a story to tell. So I'd like to share, if I can, like little snippets of each. And I guess to start with, I'll just summarize all 4 experiences in a little snippet. So birth number 1, and I'm also quite young. I just turned 21 and I had my first baby. It was a very misinformed, uneducated, fearful, stressful and very loud birth experience in a hospital setting that was extremely unsupportive. Followed by 2 years later, I have my beautiful daughter who told me as a spirit baby before conception that she would be birthed in the water. So I'd already had this amazing vision and I was like, yes, it's going to be pain-free. It's going to be so relaxing. And so it is. And so it was. It literally was the most incredible experience ever, followed by 6 hours later, a near-death experience. Yeah. And that was because what had happened after the birth, after this amazing water birth, and I go to rest, I didn't stand up for quite some time, and the hemorrhage actually pulled, and then my body went into shock. So that was a near-death experience. And then my baby, however, had slept through that entire thing. So it was quite aligned that she knew Mama's going to go through some stuff and I just need to have a big sleep here and then we'll come back to her later. So it was very spooky and a lot of things shifted for me after that. And then I'd left this relationship with their biological father a couple of years later after having this mass awakening and accelerating quite quickly and not really understanding myself at a level where I was able to communicate that and really bring him along on the journey, nor was he willing. So there's parts to that also. I then find that I have these amazing abilities that I can channel. And I'd already been a psychic my entire life. And when I say channeling, it goes beyond basic levels of mediumship where I can pull an oracle card and be like, oh, this is the energy that you've got right now. And here's a past loved one that's coming to you with this message. And this is perhaps when they passed on. And this is what they need to say to you. And all of that was already innate to me. And extending on from that, it really became very much more amplified after this near-death experience. And I started channeling soul messages and life story of another character that I wasn't aware was an actual human being. And so then I've like tapped into my now husband's energy. And 3 years later, he found me in person now we're married and we have two of our own children. And so that next birth experience was 5 years gap. And with my daughter, I really desired, like, oh, I'd love to repeat this process if I ever have a baby ever again, because that was really amazing. But then I had my next baby and it was another traumatic hospital, very empowering. The same cycle kind of cycled back around, where it was me advocating for myself in a very fierce, protective mama bear energy. Like I needed to hold space for myself because it wasn't held by the hospital, by the system.
Mm-hmm.
And then my fourth baby was the vision that I'd had prior to even meeting my husband, where I'd given birth in my bedroom at my home. And it ended up being a free birth. And I attended the hospital the next day after I'd had a nice little sleep. and so that was the only birth that I did not hemorrhage. The other three I did bleed quite significantly, and all of them were in a hospital setting. So that's kind of like the basic rundown, as quick as I can make it.
Well, we'll go a little bit deeper into some of the things that you said, but that's like, first of all, I've only had one child, so I only have like one experience. But as you were speaking, I was just realizing that women who have multiple children have a variety of different experiences. Sometimes each birth can actually be radically different than the one before it. And there's these kind of things people say like, oh, your second birth is easier, generally speaking, the next birth is going to be easier. That's not always the case. And what is easy when it comes to birth? It sounds like, with your second daughter, there was a lot about it that was like ideal, except for the fact that you almost died right after giving birth. And, even that, and this is something maybe will be the next thing we get into here. When you have a near-death experience and you survive, right? I guess that's what a near-death experience is. But when you have this near-death experience and you come back to this material world in this particular body, right? It's hard to talk about it with anybody who hasn't also been through something like that, because it's this very strange, like ineffable kind of description of what we experience. There's books written about it. I've had my own experience with losing my identity, losing myself. It's one of the first podcast episodes I recorded on somebody else's podcast, but I had basically like a dissolution of identity completely at one point when I was like 19 years old. And to me, that was like a near-death experience. Like I came back into my body and I didn't know how I had gotten where I was. I had just connected with higher consciousness. It's like, I didn't even know how to talk about this for years. It was like source, God, unconditional love. I had merged with all of that for a period of time and then come back. And it took me, I think, like a decade or more to be able to figure out how to talk about it, in a way that I didn't feel like I sounded crazy to anybody who hadn't been through something like that, So maybe, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are curious who have not gone through anything like that. What do you remember? What did you experience going through that? What was the experience like for you?
This for me was a bit of a catalyst for those channeled messages that came through from a particular frequency that at the time was not familiar to me. And as I mentioned, I was psychic, and that started when I was 7 years old, and I'd seen my first angel, and it was this little like star being, and it was very definitive. And my dad kind of demonized that my entire life. And then my mom was like, whispering in the ear, it's okay, like some people are just different. And that, there was a lot of support coming from that mother nurture energy, which was amazing to be attached to that. Like, yes, it's okay. And some people disagree. And it's always been so nice to have that experience where there was the contrast, because it's helped me evolve into an adult where contrast is acceptable and I have a lot of neutrality to it. And speaking into that, I also have a lot of neutrality to death, because in my entire life, I've been to 23 funerals. I've seen a lot of death. I've had a lot of people very close to me pass away, and some not so close to me. A lot of people very close to my siblings, which I have 4 of, and my family unit. And so death has always been a theme. I've recorded other podcasts about death and rebirth. So I love that you've also had like similar experiences through identity. And we just transcend, like that cliche saying, we're just humans, we're just humans, but we're a soul having a human experience. And it's really hard to put that into tangible ways of understanding until you go through these soul shaking, out of body experience, essentially. And it really was like me seeing myself in a very wide open space. And all I could hear was, calm down, you calm down. And there was this very gentle but firm voice asserting to me that that was the only thing that I needed to do in that moment, was to calm down. And I remember just leaving the room, and I ended up in literally just another room in my consciousness, and I was alone. And I was like, well, okay, well, this is quiet. Like, I understood that I had just had a baby, and I'm remembering her, and I'm remembering that I have a family that I need to go back to. I'm remembering my firstborn. I'm remembering that my dad was visiting me, and I was having all of these inner conversations with my mind. And then I just remember like the moment that I dropped back in, and I felt like a wave. It's almost like you're in the ocean, and then you just get thrown under the wave and you just come back up for air. And I just remember that first breath. It was literally like as if, am I born again? And then I was also in like a mental shock at the point, and I just kind of laid there, and my body was still in shock after it was having a heart attack, essentially, because my heart rate was so elevated that it was uncontrollable. And yeah, so it was kind of really spooky to feel that the denseness of the body again, and then understand that we can just go so far away in such a short amount of human time, and be that far away in our consciousness. And so from that moment on, I really dedicated myself to the study of that. And that was in 2015. So my first birth in 2013 and 2015. And I really honed in on the skills of, oh, so I have all these intuitive pings, and I understand manifestation, and I know about the laws of the universe, but linking all of that together was a whole other experience in itself. And the birth of Danikah as the woman, as the psychic woman, as the sage, the oracle, that really only happened after I died, and I came back again, and I saw myself in a completely different way. And I was like, whoa, whoa, like you can say as many affirmations about beauty and worthiness and all of the things about being happy, and I am this and I am that, and I know this and I feel that. It just doesn't sink in unless that's really embodied, and you look into the inside of your soul, not just look at the mirror work. Like that's a really great tool if anybody wants to start out and they're thinking like, how do I even get into any of this? Like, what? Look at your eyes, look in the mirror. That's the conversation to start with. Nothing outside of yourself.
Right. I mean, I think that the mirror work is profound because what will show up, and I know this from my own experience, is like when you're doing that peering into your own eyes, you will simultaneously see your power, your soul, and you will see all of the things that are in the way of you accessing it. You'll see the shame, you'll see the sadness, you'll see the grief, you'll see all of that at once. That's why sometimes people have a really difficult time, staring at themselves in the mirrors, because all of the noise comes up that's in the way of your pure potential, right? And so it's a beautiful place to start, because you really start seeing, the whole picture. Right. And what you're talking about almost dying, I think that the kind of cliche thing here is like, this shows us what's really important, right? But in your case, it sounds like it showed you who you really are.
Yeah, I feel like that's quite poignant. And it wasn't that things fell away intentionally. It wasn't my intention that I'd set out upon this path to become more conscious or more aligned, and all of these like token things that we say, which is still true. The frequency of alignment, authenticity, integrity, that they're legitimate frequencies that are so far away from where I was in self-hate. And I used to, at one point through this awakening, I was also consuming a lot of alcohol, which I now never do. And I'm vegetarian like 99% of the time as well. And so just going through all of these changes in the way that I was perceiving myself and then adjusting that frequency is what then obviously we're seeing all of the areas in our lives that are misaligned, and people, relationships, conversations where we don't want to engage in low vibes like gossip or catching up with your friends and they're just bitching about their husbands, and I'm sitting there shaking my head or like scratching my head and I'm thinking, is this normal? Like, are people in this much disease and distress, and they actually created lifestyles that they don't like? And where is that projection coming from that I'm now seeing that? Where do I not like my life? What do I desire to change and become more of who I know I was born to be? Because that inner voice is there. It's just that often the inner critic and the programming that we've been set from birth and throughout, especially early childhood, is so loud and frequent that it's really difficult at times to discern what is intuition and what are my inner demons. And really dialing up the volume of the intuition is what can help a lot.
Yes. And, you know, it's interesting, the relationship, maybe you have something to say about this, between the inner demons and the intuition. So often what I've found is that when I have my inner demons screaming something at me, you know, even just as simple as like, go get a bottle of wine right now.
Yeah.
We have to drink bottle, you know, it's like something like that. It's like, well, okay, what is this actually trying to tell me about what's happening in my life right now? Am I having a difficult time giving myself fun, giving myself relaxation, giving myself joy? Is there something that I'm trying to cover up? Is there something in my life that is hurting and I'm looking for a way to feel better? You know, there's often some kind of like wisdom, even in the voices of our inner demons, trying to get our attention about something. And so, you know, in the past, I might have just been like, oh God, I'm like self-sabotaging again. And now I'm like, okay, I'm going to see how it feels to engage with this consciously. How does it feel to engage with this energy inside of me in a conscious way that actually can inform me or teach me about what's trying to get my attention, what inside of me is trying to like be known through this behavior or this activity that I have judged as wrong or bad, you know? And so I think that, you know, that's my particular way. I know that some people, it's better for them to just kind of like put a boundary there. And that also is a strategy I've used in the past, just like put a boundary and just like be like, nope, I'm not doing this anymore. Right. And that helps people kind of get that space and distance that they need to be able to create their new pattern. Right. But I think that, and maybe you can speak to this, alcohol is particularly effective for people who have very psychic energy to kind of stop that from flowing as much. Do you think that's true?
Yes. It's a good substitute for turning up the volume on the intuition, because it has a very numbing quality, and it has an escapist version of resetting your body so that you are at ease with what's going on, although that is synthetic. It's a synthetic ease. You're manufacturing an internal environment that is synthetic because you're chemically adjusting the way that you're perceiving the world. And at that moment in time, I didn't have a conscious awareness that that's what I was doing, that I was suppressing and numbing. And it is a little bit projectory as well. I must say that not everybody that's consuming alcohol is probably in that mindset, but definitely at that time, speaking from my experience, and when you are in an addictive behavior or a lower frequency and you're doing it to silence that voice and to hide away from your inner knowing that I can do better, or I should do better, or I could take action here, or I should know more than this. And there is still that inner parent, the dominant inner parent, that's judging us like, oh, you should know better than this. And it's like, you know, you've got to kind of have another type of a conversation with yourself around, even if I do know better, is there parts of myself that I need to have a bit of compassion around based on the actual environment that I am in? And for me, it was a bit of a pacifier at times, the same way a cigarette and sucking motion for some adults, not speaking from my experience, but what I know about addictive behaviors with healing people in their cigarette addiction, it's often around this the need to suckle because of something that they'd missed in their infancy. And I love what you said about the payoff. I just want to rewind a little bit and say, actually, you've expressed that in a completely different way. But when I was investigating these inner demons and I decided to devise a plan of action to come at my inner demons with curiosity, I went to a psychologist. There was also another tangent there where I started speaking about these experiences, and my ex labeled me as crazy and not normal, and that you need to go and see a counselor because I think, like something's very wrong with you. And I'd taken that on from a trusted masculine, and I went, oh, okay, yes, it must be me. I'm such a problem. I've got issues. And so I go and I investigate, and the counselor obviously gave me a very different perspective and said, well, what's the payoff of you staying in guilt and shame? What's the payoff for you to be angry? And the payoff is, it's not a pros and cons list. It's just, here's the list of all the things that I'm actually getting out of being the way that I'm being and behaving the way that I'm behaving and choosing the things that I am choosing. What am I getting out of it? And sometimes that was attention. It could look like, again, that pacifying, comforting feeling. It might be that instead of doing breath work, you're having a cigarette, but you're still actually doing breath work. You're just consuming something at the same time. And so we've got to like not always find something to replace it with, but in a certain sense, like it's easier for some humans to find something positive to replace it with, like the gym, or as you said, having a firm boundary. And I really wanted to touch on something that I was guided to say earlier, was that I did get into a little bit of an obsession around needing to know the reason why I was the way that I was. And this also then became, probably, now I'm saying this out loud, probably something that I was actually replacing that suppression with, was then becoming a little bit obsessed with, oh, well, why? Well, where was this seeded? How did that start in my life? Who said that thing to me, and why is it my belief now? And I would try and always be rewinding and going back to those moments because I had a belief that I had to feel the pain to heal it. And while parts of that are true, sometimes we can just be so fixated on needing to know why, we're not actually just allowing ourselves to come into a somatic awareness of the experience and just experience it without having to know why we feel the way we feel.
Knowing why is trying to access a memory and go back into the past to define what's happening now. And sometimes our consciousness is leaping forward to an unknown place that we don't have any memory of, actually, or if we do, it's so deeply buried in our soul consciousness that our body doesn't have any memory of this frequency. And so it's important to recognize when we're, like you said, continuing to go back to the past to try to figure out why we're feeling it, this way now. Because the interesting thing is, as soon as you go back and access that memory, you start creating that experience again. You start living out that cycle again in your physical body just by accessing those neural pathways. You maybe start to feel that insecurity or that, fear or that overwhelm, right? That you're remembering. It like gets recreated just in the remembering of it. So there's actually wisdom, to letting go of the not knowing because it allows for the new thing, the new emerging identity or the new emerging self to kind of actually show up, right? At the same time, it's very natural to keep going back and asking why. And, I think that there's a lot that you can discover through that kind of inquiry, but there's a certain point where it's not useful anymore, which is, I think, is what you're speaking to, you getting to that point where you just realized it wasn't actually useful to focus all your energy there.
Yeah, and I think that's the key part. Focus all of your energy there. Like that is really what was happening. And that was also, as we explained, a bit of a distraction, as opposed to what now other people would explain it in other ways as a quantum leap. That, oh, let's quantum leap this. And that's really cute to say. But sometimes that just looks like acknowledging that there's a feeling, a visceral experience that I'm having, and then just settling into it and going, okay, so like, what is that going to do for me? Believing and knowing that everything is serving me, accepting and forgiving all parts of me, okay, where's my aligned action, and move on. It doesn't need to be a process every single time where we're like, I've got to heal enough and then I can have my thing. I've got to be aware and conscious enough and then I'm allowed to manifest. I have to understand all parts and then I'm going to be my true self. You're already all of those things right now if you would just allow it to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a process to get there sometimes because we get stuck in this, and maybe this is part of that parental, energy that we, or, part of us that we have, where we feel like we need to suffer and earn this, right?
Yes.
Before we can actually move forward and feel good and successful and positive in our lives. So we're unconsciously looking to just punish ourselves a little bit more.
Yeah, and what are we getting
Yeah.
out of it? Familiarity. We feel comfortable when there's that authority internally that's having a dialogue with us that's degrading or begrudging, or we feel like, oh, they must, they meaning I, like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm in trouble now, naughty me. And then it's like I better punish myself because it's comfortable to do that when we've been raised that way. And then on the opposite side of it, there's a lot of people that were not raised in really abrasive or strict and harsh environments. And so they're still seeking those boundaries, and that can be quite thrilling for them. And so it still tips in that similar direction because they're looking for something that they didn't have. Humans are always desiring to meet a need. We're just looking for the thing that's missing, as opposed to focusing as much energy as we can on the things that we already have and being in the present moment. And there's so much
Yeah.
beauty in the present moment, but we really can just slow ourselves down and knowing that also doesn't really exist, because are we ever actually fast or slow, or is it just the perfect timing for us and we can see it in that light? It's a choice.
Yes. And being patient with ourselves in our own innate timing, because our own innate timing is not always our ego's timing or other people's timing or the timing of life. Like, it's funny, I want to go back to something that you said earlier because I just love this. It was actually, we talked before we started recording, but I had lived in Australia, and during my time in Australia, I was teaching yoga. I was teaching hot Bikram yoga. And looking back on it now, it's actually, I really adore this about myself. I was a Bikram yoga teacher who also smoked cigarettes like secretly because, it's like a naughty thing. You're not supposed to do that as a yoga teacher. You know what I mean? But, in certain circumstances or for little periods of time when I was like off from a teaching job, I would be rolling my own and smoking like a chimney and all that. And I would come up with these really like, when someone would find out that I was a yoga teacher who was smoking, I would come up with these explanations about how smoking was actually a breathing exercise that brings you into the present moment, and
Wow,
also
yeah.
ways, yeah, and I would. And so when you said that,
Breath work.
breath work, it totally was because I came up with that like reasoning, but the other part was also true, which was that probably the suckling reflex, because now I understand things from a neurophysiological perspective, was still going on in me. And so I had this oral fixation of wanting to have something to attend to in my mouth in order to soothe and calm my nervous system. So that explains why when you're at a party and your nervous system's kind of elevated and you're a little bit stressed, right? What's the thing you want to do when you start, reaching that point of feeling, I'm just a little bit too uncomfortable right now. I'm going to go outside and I'm going to smoke a cigarette, and you're going to feel calmed by that suckling action, by that deep breathing moment, all of that. So, this was a part of myself that I really didn't like in the past, and I would judge myself for it, and I would go through these cycles of like basically like sinning and then repenting and like, back and forth for a long time. And then at one point there just came this like decision that was made inside of me where I was just like, I'm done with this. And like from that point forward, that was in 2016, I like had no more desire for that. And it was interesting because that was running parallel to like my somatic education and working with my body to release like some of the reflexive muscle patterns, including probably the sucking reflex that were going on, but it's like I look at that time now as like precious and actually beautiful. And I don't think that there was anything wrong with what I was doing. It was just where I was at the time, you know? And that's such a different place than where I was at that time, which was like I'd always look at the past to like tell me how I am now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I kind of, and it's so funny because 2016 was basically like the last year of this habit of drinking. Like I'd had a couple of
Mm.
glasses of wine every now and again after that. And it wasn't that I was so addicted that I had to, I wasn't doing therapy or something because of the alcohol. It was just a tool that I was using to, again, meet these needs and push that inner voice down and say, oh, well, that let's put that in the too hard basket. If we just have a glass of wine twice a day, you're going to feel like relaxed after work, relaxed while you're cooking the dinner for the kids, relaxed while you're in the bath and going to bed. And really wasn't that necessary after. And I just went cold turkey. I have quite a good, like when it's the boundary, it's the boundary. And I was like, well, I'm just not going to drink any alcohol. For a long time, I didn't. Years, about 2 years, I didn't really drink any. And then I maybe had like one or two glasses since then. And I haven't ever gone back to it. I don't have that desire to. So same year that you're talking about, and then a very similar experience with like this expansion of our identity and coming to the truth of who we desire to be instead of like who we think that we're meant to be to please this part of ourselves and do that and be there and all that contortionist behavior that we interact with as young adults. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of circling back to the light language and to the way that you receive communication, right? Because it sounds like with these periods of time where you were actively numbing the amount of energy that you were taking in, right, from the collective or from the etheric realms too, right? I think about that especially when it comes to like these, I don't know if you follow astrology or play with that very much, but like Pisces is this psychic sign that takes in all this collective energy. And they're also known for like being addicts. And
Love
I've
it.
had a couple of Pisces boyfriends who were heavy drinkers. And I've stopped, yeah, I used to judge that as some kind of weakness in them. But in alignment with what you're saying, it's like, oh, actually, this person may be highly sensitive. And this is really helping them, in a still a destructive way. It's helping them, though, cope with the
Yeah.
level of information that they are taking in constantly about other people and other people's stuff, like the empathic qualities that they may have, or even stuff that they're taking in about what's going on with collective energy or with, other realms. Like they're numbing themselves for a reason. There's maybe a very good reason for why they engage in this, right? And it just sort of switches it from a form of judgment to, again, that space of curiosity. So I was just curious with what you just described with, having that glass of wine so you could do these day-to-day things with your kids and be in a relaxed state. Was some of that, you think, because the amount of information that was pouring into you on a regular basis just felt like too much?
I've never really framed it in that way, but I kind of have to agree, probably 80%. Yeah, I'd need to agree on quite a large scale because what was happening in my environment was a lot of destruction and it was breaking down. As I said earlier, it wasn't intentional that these things happened, but it was me finding my voice again and speaking my truth. And for a little bit of context here, we were heavily involved up until the age of about 10 in the church environment. And so we'd go to church on a Sunday, and on Friday nights, there was a praise and worship session. And people would literally say to my mom, oh, like, I feel healed. I feel different. It must be like the Spirit of God working through her. She's something else. Like when she sings over me, it's just, and they would literally just get up and walk off and didn't have the problem anymore. And so it became a little bit of a thing that my mum wanted to protect me from.
Mm.
She wanted to make sure that I wasn't participating all in because that's the things that people would say when I was all of me. And so then there was an outside, I think, perception that she really wanted to blanket me from those conversations that she also didn't want to have, and that my dad certainly did not feel comfortable having, knowing that I was medium as well. Fast forward, I'm 13 years old and I'm a singer songwriter. I got my first guitar gifted to me that Christmas and I never looked back. I was constantly writing music. I've written thousands of poems in my lifetime and hundreds of songs, and that was just pouring from me, which then I get to the age of 18 and I was studying music for a year and I got blind. and all the stress of that. And I pulled out of the course and I completely removed myself from my intuitive expression through my voice, through healing other people, through speaking my truth, through being in aligned relationships with anyone and everyone, including colleagues and workplaces that I'd invest my energy in. And I've really, I got to that 18. And from there, everything just became so dark. And I kind of traveled, and then I met a not so great person for my soul, or so it was perceived at the time, that it was all good. A lot of masks came off over the years. And then with this evolution of myself, that relationship really fell apart, and it was physically unsafe and spiritually unsafe. And I learned a lot. I bless that time in my life now. I look back at that phase and I think, oh my goodness, I've literally lived so much. I just turned 32. Like, I'm literally a baby. I feel like I'm a soul baby here. And at the same time, the amount of knowledge and information that's been downloaded to me, yes, there was a time where I was using that alcohol to stop the songs from coming in. And I just want to also stress that if anyone's listening to this and they can relate to that feeling of like, am I crazy? It's okay and safe also to create your own community with like-minded people. And that is what I chose to do with all of that energy. I was still drinking in that day to day, but it's almost like I'd hit 9 p.m. and I'd flick a switch, and I would write until about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And I would just write and sing and write. And I would be chanting, and I did a little bit of Kundalini yoga, and I was really just using my voice so much. But in my day-to-day life, that wasn't acceptable. That had to be shut down during the day. It needed to not be around my children. And, I also was projecting that I needed to protect them from me, because in some ways I believed that there was that dark side, and I could see how it was playing out. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, there's a lot of like spiritual immaturity that needed to be brought to the surface for me to make better decisions for myself and really educate myself on what was actually going on. And so I'd set up a twin flame channeled messages, full moon readings, and I would do like card pulls. And I had about 3,500 people in that community, which birthed the hacking of that account and not monetizing that community and not actually investing all of my efforts there. That account was hacked about 2.5 years later, which is now the birth of the business and what I'm doing right now.
Wow.
That was my wake up. That was my wake up call. Yeah. That was like, you had this thing and it's now to be completely ground zeroed. What are you going to do with this alignment now? And I was like, wow. Yeah. So that's how I became Danika Rose Creative. I've got an oracle card deck that's on the way and 3 poetry books. And I'm still, I'm doing my guided meditation, and the light language is a part of the healing work, because people can feel that in their system as I sing. So it's always been an ability. I just didn't know what I was meant to be doing with it. And so I blocked a lot of it.
Yeah. Well, let's get a little bit into some of that question of monetizing these things, because I know that people can feel really uncomfortable with that in the beginning of their journey. But that's something that you kind of look back and go, oh, okay, that was something that like would have been important for me to do in a few different ways, probably, and now this is something that you're coaching people around in terms of being able to actually build a business from their spiritual gifts that is aligned and feels good ethically and all of that kind of stuff. Because I think sometimes when we're given these beautiful gifts, we think that we should just be giving them away, and kind of taking on this martyr role of just giving and giving and giving of ourselves. And the truth is that we live in a world where when you do that, people don't really appreciate it in the same way as they do when there's an energetic exchange, and money is an energy. Would you speak on that a little bit about the value of monetizing, or the issue of monetizing?
Yeah, and I think it's so funny because there's a lot of like, I guess I also was a little bit hung up on people that had either just like done a 4-day course and then all of a sudden they just launched this business, and then they're like not trauma informed and they're completely going at it with a hacksaw. They're just regurgitating information that they've learned. And we see this in the industry. There's a lot of charlatans out there that also are well aware that that's what they're doing, and they'll use a lot of tactics like NLP. So there can be quite a sticky point for me around that. But I wasn't a baby when it comes to business consulting or business strategy, because that's actually what I was doing as my career. I was in hospitality as a venue manager. I'd owned my own venues. I'd helped grow about 3. By the time I was 25, I'd helped 3 businesses grow out to multi-millions. That was my professional career. And so I'd also helped, you know, all of my friends would come to me with their little side projects, and I'd say, oh, if you just do this and you do that and grow your email list, because if your social media gets hacked, oh, the hindsight, oh, the bee sting, straight on the, when that happened to me. And because these are things that I already knew that we could do, I just didn't ever have that awareness that that's what I was supposed to be doing as my career. It was just me doing Danika over here and compartmentalizing that. And then I'd move over here and I'm all feminine and I'm just flowing and I'm sharing and I'm healing and doing all of that energy exchange for, you know, just a couple of comments here and there, or people saying, whoa, that changed me. And that was enough for me at that moment in time. But merging them to psychic business strategist, it was literally just a no-brainer. It was me exiting my business and selling my business, and that was still very successful, but we wanted to move interstate. And so we have to leave that paradigm where the 9 to 5 exists. And I've already been growing out online businesses and knowing so much about growing businesses and managing teams and building websites and sales copy and sales skills and talking to reps every day and all of these things. And so just putting the two together was the only way. It was like the sacred inner union that people talk about, but in such a practical, physical sense. Because it really was the marrying, and this really happened as well when I met my husband. It was the marrying of the masculine in me, the structure, systems, automation, strategy, and then that, you know, looking at the softness and the flow and how we work with our menstrual cycles and what we're doing on a somatic level and integrating both. And so I think why that's important is because I'm not someone that had business experience and then just magically said I'm a healer, and I'm also not a healer that just magically said, well, I'm going to monetize this. So I think that's really where this like part of my heart is so strong and heavy in the ethics. I'm like, y'all, if you are out there and you're pretending that one is this or the other and it isn't from embodied experience, then is it really necessary to then go and say, I can help you grow your Instagram just because your healing wasn't popping off? Maybe there's something else that you can own about yourself and integrate about yourself as just a monetized healer, and let that be enough, and let that be the driving force if that's what you came here to do, as opposed to adding on a business extra where you're now helping other healers, and then it becomes coaches coaching coaches to coach a coach to coach, and so on. And so we can really get stuck in that paradigm of what we've all created. And there's still some beauty in that. Everybody needs to be helped at particular points in time. And there are soul contracts to be fulfilled when it comes to business. And when it comes to monetizing our gifts, we're not monetizing our gifts in my perception. What we're doing is that we are taking on an energetic exchange for a transformation that affects the entire collective consciousness. And depending on where you play and at which price point, that gets to be the differentiator with the amount of impact that we can create. And I just want to make it a little bit easier to understand, because I've kind of explained it in a bit of a stretchy, complex way. I'm going to just bring it all in. I have a $99 membership, and I also have a $20,000 offer. So that's what I'm talking about when I say I am here to serve the conscious collective. I mean it. I'm here for the leaders, but I'm also here for people that just are like out there in the dark and they haven't got a business and they're just so like, what do I even do? Like, guide me. What the is going on? What is life? Who am I? What is happening to me? And I'm like, okay, come here, babies. Like, this is what's going on. And it does get really scary for a time, but like, this is what we can do about it. And then again, like, there's people that are extremely psychic and they're already so embodied in maybe the healing or maybe the business, but they're really trying so hard to to force them together when it just has to be like a merge. It gets to be like something that's very a gentle process,
something
but not everyone
organic.
has the tools. Yeah. And something organic can even look like our mindset around, well, I'd like a 7-figure business, so I'm just gonna crap, like it's got to be embodied, it has to be both, I need the balance. Because we're so spiritual and we understand the energetics of having both, sometimes we're also forcing that to happen, and we end up wearing masks. And yeah, there's a lot of other things that can really be getting in the way that just need some attention, and they need love, and they need compassion and forgiveness and healing.
Yeah, well, and that embodiment that you're talking about, people, I guess, there's a lot of talk about embodiment, and people think that like, oh, I just like focus in on my body, or I'll just like start moving or holding myself in that way. And that's not embodiment. But what I've found is that it's about how you're actually living your boring everyday life and relating to yourself in that boring everyday life process. That is what will embody it. If you have this healing business where you're, really asking people, and I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, people to slow down, right? And listen to their nervous system and listen to their body. But in your everyday boring life, you're not doing that. It doesn't matter how much you say that to people or how great your guided meditations are if like you are not doing that, or at least not trying to do that, not embodying what you're saying is the way through into a healing place in your body. And that's a hard pill to swallow because we aren't perfect as people. And there are going to be times when we do get caught up in, the desire for validation through monetary success and through, having that, I'm a successful entrepreneur kind of energy, right? As like a healer. And it's easy to read all the strategy books and have it be like, okay, you basically have to tell people that you're going to make them money in order to make money.
Yeah, and I'm such a rule breaker. Like my role is literally to decondition everything that you thought that you believed about what marketing is supposed to be. And then you just get to do it your way. And a lot of people are so unforgiving of themselves. Oh, well, if I don't post 3 times a day, and if I don't have the correct messaging to target the right person and make sure that I sound a particular way to manipulate the audience to want to buy, they probably already want to buy something from you if you're just you, because that's your authentic frequency, almost as high as the frequency of love. And so when they can just love you because you love you, you're just seeing all of that mirrored back, as opposed to, like we're saying, rather than forcing ourselves to be something that we're not. For example, you might want to have a high ticket sale or a high ticket offer, but if you don't actually have the capacity to hold that frequency, or you might not have 5 things that you can package up and say this will be $10,000, but that's where you're at. That's perfectly okay. Also, that you have a $500 offer or a $100 session or a $50 email reading or whatever it may be. It's not even just, this conversation is not even really just for the healers. It's also about people that are just wanting to create an impact within whatever industry they're in, and say, well, if I'm in this industry and then I can see where there's a pay gap, or I can see where we're not honoring BIPOC, or we're not honoring country, and we're not bringing that, the transparency even about all of these topics to the surface, then what are we doing? And they're sitting there and they get really frustrated, and there's a lot of like tension that it can create in work environments. But that's the ticket. It doesn't matter if you're monetizing it in a business and you're having these offers, so to speak. It could be that you are in a 9-to-5 job and you have this massive passion. There's a fire in your belly that actually hurts you when you go home at night and think, why is it this way? Why are we operating in this way? And you can feel really bogged down, and it makes you feel more tired, and you get frustrated. You don't want to show up for work. There's all these other symptoms that your body and your mind will start telling you. And the only real encouragement that I have is speak up. Use your voice. Use this energy that you have, and you might be exchanging that energy by a 9-to-5 wage. That's your mission. It's perfectly okay. Like, no matter where you're at in all of these exchanges in money. And if you're looking at it like, wow, it would be so exciting and thrilling and it's going to change my life if I have 20K, or you're looking at the impact of quitting your 9 to 5 job and then you're going to be broke. And either way, it's not neutral. You're coming at it from these heightened and lowering experiences. And so it's creating a disturbance within your energetic body. If you adjust the way that you perceive things as, what do I want? What do I have to say? Who am I here to serve? What did I come here for? What is my soul blueprint wanting and desiring to express to the people that are in front of me, contracted to be in front of me right now through soul contracts and so on? And that's the only question, really. That's the most important thing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, what you're describing is something I feel like I've been going through over the last couple of years since I started my business, because there was a real like push and kick in the pants for me to like, make this a viable financial like experience. My first offer that I, came up with was a 6-month program and it was 5K. And I felt really ballsy to go out and do that. But I had so much experience personally with this somatic modality that I felt like, whoever comes in and says, I'm ready to do this, like I'm going to trust that they're here to learn something with me, and that I'm here to share with them what I've gathered over this like long journey that I've been on with lots of pain and lots of suffering. And so if someone shows up at my door and they're in pain and they've been suffering, I'm like,
I
oh,
understand. Come here.
I understand. It's like time traveling back to myself 7 years ago,
Yeah.
and I go, okay, yeah, I have hope. I don't just have hope. I have clarity. I have like a certain level of certainty, even though we don't really have certainty, but you have this feeling. You can almost see into a timeline where they are existing in a fuller, more complete version of themselves that's actually already there. It's just on a slightly like 2 degrees off timeline, for them. And, it's been a journey to like figure out how to keep redirecting my energy back to what am I really here to do? And where are the people who need me? And how can I like send out the bat signal so that they know that I'm here and that they can come and meet me and we can start what we're supposed to do here together. Kind of that feeling of being like fated, I think is one word for it, or
Yeah, I
like
love
this is
that.
already it's what's the word I was using like 2 years ago, it was inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
already done. We just haven't really reached that moment in time in this existence yet. And then there's still action, and I wanted to kind of touch on doing it for free and not getting the energy exchange. We're also, in some ways, we're not getting that law of reciprocity really working for us because we're not being law of responsibility, and then we're not taking the action. And then it's also not the right balance, which is law of polarity. And so when you learn how to really understand that all of them need to kind of be working congruently to get that result, as opposed to, well, I'm just not going to take responsibility for the booking system or for the structure around asking someone for money or for my blocks and my insecurities around receiving, or like whatever. There's so many things that we could say here, that I hope that makes sense, that if you're taking the action and you're responsible for the actions that you're taking, and then you're just in a flow with it and creating a balance in your life where they can coexist with neutrality, it's inevitable, like you're saying, for things to just come back to us. And the money's just the byproduct of us in soul service, the abundance. It's not about, I really want to make this super clear, it's about wealth creation. Wealth to me looks like taking my kids to the farm to pick up the free range eggs. That is wealth to me. Wealth to me looks like driving a nice car that has really loud sound system so I can blast my 528 frequency when I'm driving. Like, yes, like that's wealth. Wealth to me is having a safe home where I know that I can close the door and the rest of the world is shut off. Like, we're not just talking about reciprocation in a financial aspect. And so I wanted just to make that really clear, that sometimes abundance for people doesn't actually look like 10K months or quitting your 9 to 5 and creating this massive business. Even when I grew this business out to 6 figures, I was also working at a cafe 20 to 30 hours a week because I'm obsessed with making coffees. I've been a barista majority of my life, whether it's been side hustles or like, we're just so multifaceted. Just let yourself do the things that makes you feel the best. And that's when things will pour in more.
I love that. I love that. I think I was lucky enough in the beginning of my journey, my entrepreneurial journey, to have a couple business coaches that were like, no, you can be all of who you are. You can be like your funky, groovy self with a lady mullet, and you don't have to be like a beige person, and you can just like totally do it how you do it. And I'm so glad, because that's not how every marketing person is. Some people are very particular about formulas and follow this strategy, and oh, here's what you're doing wrong, versus looking at, who are you, and can you be your brand? Can you be who you are, and let the people who want to find you, like who connect with you as an individual, know who you are so they can find you. It reminds me of this thing. And I think this is like something that is a more kind of physical way that this shows up. If we want to find a person who's going to love and accept us like as we are, especially I think for a lot of like women, it might be love and accept my body, right, as it is. We have to let our body be how it is, and we have to let our body be seen and touched as it is. And so when we spend all this time masking or putting, covering up and putting things on to make our bodies appear some way that they are not, only taking pictures from like the attractive angle, being really like, careful about how we hold ourselves in front of our partners. I mean, for me in my 20s, it showed up like, every time that I, had a guy holding me in bed, I would suck my stomach in, and I would actually like hold my stomach in while I'm supposed to be like comfortable and relaxing with this person. And like what I realized was like, I can't do that if I want someone to really be embracing and loving my body. I need to show them what my real body is, so that the person who shows up is not somebody who wants me in like a masked state or prefers me when I'm wearing makeup. I want someone who loves all of me, including my squishy, frumpy parts, and it's a gutsy thing to do that, to show up on the internet and like not look perfect some days and just be yourself and, talk to people as another human, but people love that. People want that, that's how you find your people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'd love to just a credit to those coaches, because obviously, given your timeline, by the sound of it, they were a little bit ahead of the times in some ways. But it's also like energetic soul contract. You were probably more attracted to them because they were speaking into those really sovereign ways of doing business. But the best thing about all of this is that will be the only way that businesses thrive and exist in the next 5 years. It's literally that. It's new paradigm business, but it's already been in existence. It's just that there are people that are at the forefront of really pushing that as the overall theme, and less about the 5 steps ebook and fix this cookie cutter. If you don't do that, then you suck, and let's poke all your pain points so that you hire me and you feel bad and pull out that credit card during the sales call. And a lot of like icky things that have been going on in the industry are really just getting washed out. They're just getting washed out now, and it's really a nice cleansing time for these new frequencies to be dropping in, and even us having this conversation right now. And it's unimaginable what can happen when we just use our voice to speak into things that are truth and that are magnetic frequency. And people talk about, I really want to have magnetic marketing, or I want to be more attractive to my soulmate, or I wish I could be a better friend and I had more friends, or I want to get that promotion at work. Be more of who you actually are, and people will start to, they're not going to be relating to you because you're telling a story that's relatable. They're going to be relating to the parts of themselves that they see in you as you being you. And there's nothing more beautiful. Nothing.
Yeah, truth. Absolutely. I agree 100%. This conversation today, I feel like it's flowed in all these beautiful directions. And I kind of want to go back to like one of the first things that we talked about, which was birth, right?
Yeah.
And the birth of your children. And then it sounds like also there was a birth of yourself, a rebirthing of who you are and a coming home to like your true qualities and the gifts that you really have to give. And then there was even another birth of merging, your masculine, feminine energies, or even we could talk about it like your right and left hemispheres, like this
Yeah.
coming together of the spiritual self and the analytical self, right? And embodying that, actually being that person so that you can walk around in the world not trapped in a schism, right? But actually whole. And I think that this is such a beautiful conversation, an inspiring conversation for people who might still be trying to figure out how to bring those two spaces together. And what I want to say is just that, there's no like specific recipe for it. Like you had it come through these birth experiences and through a near-death experience. And, so if you're listening out there and you're even going back and thinking, oh, wow, there were these times in my life that I did rebirth a new self, right? And then a new part of me came. You've probably already experienced what you're seeking before, but now it's going to take a new shape. It may show up completely differently.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's really nice also to be aware that it's not from nothing. I love to say this quite frequently because a lot of people will say, wow, like you have such good boundaries. And I'm like, yes, because in the past I didn't and I was hurt a lot. Wow, you're so good at public speaking. Yes, because I used to force myself to do that so that I could be more liked because I was getting bullied at school. There's a lot of like darker experiences that I don't really want to touch on as we wind out this podcast episode, but I think it's just really important to know that no matter what you're going through, there's always an opposite. There's always going to be the contrast. And the quicker you decide that all of it is okay, and the easier you allow it to be for yourself by just having that conversation, like, girl, I know this is so hard for you right now. I see that you're feeling this and this and this and this. And you're just allowing those moments of chaos to be organized in a way that you are creating containment for these explosive, all of those feelings that you have, but you're setting the space for it. And you're hiring people like Amy to hold space for you to just feel into your body, and you're coming to me for things where you can expand and decondition and just let yourself be yourself and all of those things. Like if you don't know how to do this by yourself, find someone that can help you and invest in yourself and say yes to yourself and be aware that it is a bit of a fast forward button to talk to someone else and listen to podcasts about people that have been so totally annihilated by life and come out the other side of it. Like that, be around these types of conversations and put yourself in those rooms with people that have actually got the lived experience. It's really crucial if you want to make it a bit easier for yourself and not feel like it's overwhelming or that you have to believe everything that you think and that everything that everyone told you was always true, because mostly nothing is right or wrong and nothing is true or false. You get there eventually where you're just like, okay, so it is what it is, and I am here now, and that is all. And it takes a long time to get there. And it doesn't mean that I'm perfect or that I'm professing to be some enlightened human being that just lives like this all of the time. There's always triggers and there's always troubleshooting and there's always something that's going to come up because we are human. There are things in life that are so unpredictable that you just never imagine. You just couldn't put your finger on the pulse until it's blinking at you and it's like beep, 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 and you're like, oh, okay, so yeah, let's sort that out. Let's give that some love.
Yes, beautifully said. It's stepping into the energy that you're ready, or maybe not even ready, but that is your next energy that you're being called into, that your body's already moving towards, right? And just being around that through conversations like this, through other people who are, maybe just a couple steps ahead of you on the path, it's so important and it's so valuable. So thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing so much of your personal life and experiences with us, and also some of your amazing gifts
Thank
for how
you.
you
Thanks for
merge
having
these
me.
things of soul and strategy. Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to tell our listeners a bit about like where they can find you? If you have any specials or offers that they could, interact with if they liked some of the things you were saying?
Yeah, well, next you can find Amy on my podcast. We'll see how the timing works out. But Strategy and Soul is the podcast. So we're going to do a bit of a swap, which is really helpful to get all these different angles, especially if you follow either one of us. It's nice to tap into different aspects and really understand holistically who is this person that I desire to work with. And then, yes, that podcast is attached to my $99 membership, which is one of my offers that I am promoting at the moment. And of course, there's also one-on-one work with me in a couple of group containers like masterminds or retreats. And I pretty much just do whatever I feel like is resonant for me. And because I'm a strategist as well, of course, I kind of plan in like 12 and 6 month blocks, but I'm quite loose with what I do in those times. It just has a general theme and I can feel into the frequency of my own blueprint and where I desire to go. And sometimes my momentum also looks like me waiting in stagnation and confusion and questioning everything and just, going through the motions like any normal person.
Yeah, nice. So Strategy and Soul is the podcast. Is that also the name of your business or website?
It's always Danika Rose Creative.
Okay,
Because
gotcha.
I'm going to be doing some pretty crazy. I've got like some subscriptions for meditations that I'm working on, and oracle cards and poetry books. And I'm a musician, so I'm starting to showcase a bit more of that stuff. It's pretty much whatever that fits under Danika Rose Creative. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, definitely check out her podcast. I'm excited to be on there and share some of my own stuff. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Definitely feel akin to you, which is fun. You can kind of feel into someone's energy just through their copy and through the things you post. And so I was so excited to like actually get to talk to you and see your face and all of that. So yeah, thank you for using your voice.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Free Your Soma podcast. To find out more information about today's guest, check the show notes. And to find out more information about me, Amy Takaya, and the Radiance program, visit www.freeyoursoma.com.